The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when Jakob Hoffman finally decided he had to make the descent from his claim, supplies or not. The old prospector had weathered worse storms in his 15 years working the Colorado Rockies, but something about this one felt different. Ominous, like the mountain itself was warning him to seek lower ground. He packed what little food remained, wrapped himself in layers of wool and fur, and set out down the narrow trail as snow whipped sideways across his vision. He'd made it perhaps 2 miles when he saw the dark shape half buried in a snowdrift beside a fallen pine. At first, Jacob thought it was a dead elk or bear, but as he approached, his heart seized. It was a woman, her long black hair spread across the white snow like ink on paper, her body curled protectively around something. She wore only a thin dress, completely inadequate for the killing cold, and her lips had gone blue. She should have been dead. By all rights, she must be dead. But then he heard it. A weak, mewling cry. Not from the woman, but from the bundle clutched against her chest. God Almighty, Jacob breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. With trembling hands, he pulled back the ragged blanket to reveal a newborn infant, perhaps only hours old, somehow still alive against its mother's body. The baby's skin was mottled with cold, but it was breathing, crying with surprising strength given the circumstances. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes filled with pain and fierce determination. She was Apache, Jacob realized, though what an Apache woman was doing this high in the mountains in winter, alone and heavily pregnant, he couldn't fathom. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a whisper emerged. Please, save my daughter. I'll save you both, Jacob promised, though he had no idea how. His cabin was still 3 miles away. The woman was clearly dying, and the baby wouldn't last long in this cold. But he couldn't leave them. He shrugged out of his heavy bearskin coat and wrapped it around both mother and child, then lifted the woman as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, as if the effort of bringing life into this harsh world had consumed her own substance. The journey back to his cabin became a blur of agony. Each step was a battle against wind that tried to knock him down, snow that buried the trail, and cold that crept into his bones despite the exertion. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words in Apache that Jacob couldn't understand, sometimes gripping his shirt with surprising strength. The baby cried intermittently, its wails growing weaker. By the time Jacob kicked open his cabin door, his muscles were screaming and his lungs burned with each breath. He laid the woman on his own bed, closest to the stove, and immediately set about building up the fire until it roared. He heated water, found clean cloths, and did his best to warm them both, gradually. Too fast could be as dangerous as the cold itself. As warmth slowly returned to the cabin, Jacob tended the baby first, cleaning her gently and wrapping her in the softest blankets he possessed. The newborn's cries gradually steadied into the rhythmic breathing of sleep, and Jacob fashioned a makeshift cradle from his supply crate, padding it with his spare shirts. Only then did he turn his full attention to the mother. Her breathing was shallow, rattling in her chest. Pneumonia, almost certainly, brought on by exposure and the trauma of childbirth in the snow. He'd seen men die from less. He heated broth from his dwindling supplies and managed to get a few spoonfuls into her before she pushed his hand away weakly. My daughter, she whispered. Is she? She's alive, sleeping, strong little fighter like her mother. Jacob adjusted the blankets around her. You need to rest, ma'am, save your strength. But the woman shook her head with what little energy she possessed. Her hand reached out, gripping his wrist with desperate intensity. No, no time. You must... Listen. She coughed, and Jacob could hear fluid in her lungs. My name is Nal Nish. My husband was... She paused, struggling with emotion or pain. Was Captain John Mercer. U.S. Army. Jacob's eyebrows rose. A white soldier marrying an Apache woman wasn't unheard of, but it was rare and usually complicated. "Where is your husband now, Mrs. Mercer?" Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "Dead. Killed by his own men. 3 weeks ago. They discovered he was helping my people, passing information about troop movements. They called him traitor." Her breathing became more labored, but she forced herself to continue. "He told me to run, to hide. I was already carrying his child. I went to the mountains because I have something they want. Something John gave me before they shot him." She gestured weakly toward her dress, and Jacob carefully searched, finding a oilskin packet sewn into the lining. Inside was a leather journal, its pages covered in neat handwriting, and several official-looking documents with army seals. "This is evidence," Nalnish explained. "Names of officers who ordered massacres of peaceful villages. Proof of stolen supplies sold to Confederate sympathizers. John spent 2 years documenting everything." She coughed again, harder. "Men have died for this information. Men will kill for it." Jacob felt the weight of the journal in his hands, understanding with cold clarity why this woman had fled into the mountains during winter, why she'd given birth alone in a blizzard rather than seek help. "They've been hunting you," he said quietly. "Yes. I thought, in the mountains, they wouldn't follow. But the storm came early. The baby came early." Nalnish's hand moved to touch her daughter's cradle. "I am dying, Prospector. I feel it in my body. But my daughter, she is innocent. She carries her father's name, his blood. In that journal is a letter John wrote, acknowledging her as his legitimate child and heir. Without it, she is just another Indian orphan. With it," she paused, "with it she has claim to his family's estate in Philadelphia. She has a future." "Mrs. Mercer, don't talk like that. You're going to—" Jacob began, but she cut him off. "I am going to die, and we both know it," she said with Apache directness. "So I must trust you with everything that matters. Those documents must reach a Colonel Samuel Harrison at Fort Massachusetts. He was John's friend, one of the few honest officers remaining. So he will know what to do with the evidence, and he will protect my daughter's inheritance." Jacob stared at the journal, then at the sleeping infant. "That fort is over 100 miles from here, and those soldiers who killed your husband, they'll be watching for anyone carrying these documents." "I know," Nalnish whispered. "I know what I ask is dangerous. But you saved us from the snow. You brought us to warmth and safety when you could have passed by. You are a good man, Jacob Hoffman. I see it in your eyes." Through the night, Jacob tended both mother and child, though it became increasingly clear that Nalnish's strength was fading. She told him stories about her husband, how they'd met when he'd stopped some soldiers from harassing Apache women at a trading post, how he'd courted her despite the scandal, how they'd married in secret with a sympathetic minister. She spoke of John's growing horror at the Army's treatment of indigenous peoples, his decision to document the abuses, his dream that the truth might change things. "He believed in justice," she said, her voice barely audible now. "Even knowing it would cost him everything. That is the man I want my daughter to know about. That is why the truth must survive, even if I cannot." As dawn broke through the cabin windows, painting the room in pale gold light, Nalnish called Jacob to her bedside one final time. Her breathing was labored, each word an effort. "Her name is Grace. Grace Nalnish Mercer. Promise me. Promise me you will tell her about both her parents, that she comes from 2 peoples, 2 traditions, that she was born from love, not shame." "I promise," Jacob said, his throat tight. "I'll get her to Colonel Harrison. I'll make sure she has the life her father wanted for her." Nalnish smiled, a beautiful expression that transformed her pain-ravaged face. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for giving her a chance." Her eyes moved to the cradle where Grace slept peacefully. I wish I could have held her longer, told her stories, taught her our ways." A tear rolled down her cheek. "But you will tell her I loved her, that everything I did was for her?" "I'll tell her every day," Jacob promised, taking her cold hand in his. Nalnish's eyes drifted closed. "John is calling me," she murmured. "I can hear him, saying it's time to rest." Her breathing grew slower, quieter. "Take care of our star, our little Grace." The words faded into silence, and with one final exhale, Nalnish Mercer was gone. Jacob sat for a long moment, this rough prospector who'd spent most of his life alone in the mountains, now cradling the hand of a dead woman while her orphaned daughter slept nearby. He thought about his simple life, how it had been uncomplicated. Just him, his claim, and the patient search for gold. That life was over now. The moment he'd pulled that woman from the snow, everything had changed. He buried Nalnish on a sunny slope overlooking the valley, marking the grave with river stones, arranged in both a cross and an Apache symbol for eternal journey that he'd seen on her necklace. Then he returned to the cabin, packed his most essential belongings, wrapped baby Grace in the warmest blankets, and secured the precious journal in a waterproof pouch. The journey to Fort Massachusetts took 3 weeks. Jacob traveled cautiously, avoiding main trails, never staying in the same camp twice. He learned to care for an infant through trial and error, how to warm goat's milk he purchased from isolated homesteads, how to fashion diapers from cloth, how to soothe her cries with gentle rocking. Grace proved to be a remarkably resilient baby, as if she understood the importance of their mission. They encountered soldiers twice. The first time, Jacob posed as a widower traveling to family in the east, hiding the journal in Grace's cradle. The second time, he had to hide in a ravine for 6 hours while a patrol passed, Grace miraculously staying silent against his chest. Each time, he thought of Nalnish's trust, of the promise he'd made, and pushed forward. Colonel Harrison proved to be exactly the man Nalnish had described, honest, principled, and outraged by the contents of the journal. "Captain Mercer was one of the finest officers I've known," he said, his jaw tight with emotion. "That he was murdered for trying to stop these atrocities." He looked at baby Grace sleeping in Jacob's arms. "His daughter will be protected. I swear it on John's memory." The journal's revelations sparked an investigation that eventually led to court-martials and reforms. Grace Nalnish Mercer was legally recognized as John Mercer's heir, with a trust established from his family's estate to ensure her education and future. Colonel Harrison found a good Army family to raise her, people who promised to honor both her heritages. But before Jacob left her, he spent one final evening holding Grace, telling her about her mother's courage and her father's integrity, even though she was too young to understand. "You come from warriors and dreamers," he whispered, "from people who believed that truth and love matter more than comfort or safety. Don't ever forget that." 20 years later, Jacob received a letter at his claim. It was from Grace, now a young woman educated in both Philadelphia schools and Apache traditions, working as a teacher on a reservation. She'd tracked him down through Colonel Harrison's records, wanting to thank the man who'd saved her life and honored her mother's trust. "You could have left us in the snow," she wrote. "You could have kept the journal and sold its secrets. Instead, you gave up months of your life to keep a promise to a dying woman. That is the definition of honor." Jacob kept that letter until his own death, tucked in the same oilskin that had once protected the journal. The prospector who'd spent his life searching for gold had found something far more valuable in that blizzard. the knowledge that one person's choice to do right could change the course of a life, and that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in the ground, but in the courage to honor a dying woman's final wish.